Greetings chess friends, welcome once again to this chess video. We'll continue our series on the English opening, and in this video we'll look at the strategy White adopts when he plays the Botvinnik system. Of course we begin with the move 1c4, and Black plays which is probably the most principled move, e5, putting a pawn in the centre. Of course we begin hyper-modernly with the move g3, and Black builds a solid centre with the move knight c6, bishop g2, and in this instance Black fianchettos his own king's bishop. We continue dominating the light squares in the centre with knight c3. Black plays bishop g7, and this move here, e4, signifies the Botvinnik system. We're prepared to give up some control of d4 for an ultra solid grip on the d5 square. Play usually continues with d6, and here, rather than playing knight f3, we play knight g to e2, and this has to do with our strategy. Sometimes Black will try and pin her knight, trying to gain more control of d4, and this move knight g to e2 facilitates the movement of the f-pawn. Now let us just take a moment to look at this position. What indeed is our strategic aims? Well, we can of course play to undermine Black's control of d4, and we can do this directly trying to prepare and get in the move d4, or we can of course lock the centre with d3 and play on the flanks with moves like b4, b5, and of course f4. So these are our strategic aims in this particular system. What I want to do now is take a look at a few, what we might say, instances which are particular to this system. For example, when is the right time to put a knight on d5? Or how do we react when Black plays an early f5? Do we in fact take with the g-pawn? What happens if Black takes with a piece? Or how do we react if Black takes with a pawn? So we'll look at these things in this little video here. So let me put this back. So we played knight g to e2. Black, of course, he wants to also have the facility to move his f-pawn. He plays knight to e7. We can castle, Black castles, and if we play d3, remaining flexible, and Black plays bishop to e6, this is the opportune time to put our knight on d5. Why? Well, simply put, this knight cannot be touched. If Black ever tries to take it with the knight, he loses a piece to this fork here. And of course, if he takes with the bishop, he loses the bishop pair. And this pawn here is backwards on a half open file, and it might be difficult to defend. So if you ever see your opponent having this setup with these two pieces here, now you know is the time to put your knight on d5. And there it exerts a powerful influence, the c7 square and the f6 square. Now what about if Black plays an early f5? How do we deal with that? Well, let me set up a position on the board for you and we'll take a look at that. Now, this is a position from a game played in the Bundesliga 1991-92 by Schmeichel against Yusupov. And here we can see that black has played an early f5. Now the rule for capturing is that we capture on f5 if black of necessity needs to capture with either a piece or a pawn, but not a knight. The simple reason for that is that if a knight ever reached this f5 square, it's really excellently placed, where it prepares pressure against the d4 square. So that is our little rule. If plays an f5, if black needs to capture with any other piece or a pawn except a knight, then we take on f5. In this instance, black recaptured with the bishop, and the result of this is that we can see that black no longer has pawn control over the square e4. And if we can in the long term prevent black from playing d5, and we can use this square e4 here as an excellent outpost for one of our pieces, probably a knight. So the game continued. d4, bishop h3, knight d to c3, preparing to play d5 and knight to e4, bishop takes g2, king takes g2, e takes d4, knight takes d4, knight g to e7, bishop g1, knight takes d4, bishop takes d4, knight f5, bishop takes, knight takes, and rook to e4. And have a little look at this position. We have control of the e file. Our kingside pawn majority is mobile, whereas black's is fairly static. And we have some little advantage in this position. So let's take a look at another example where black plays an early f5, and I'll set up that position for you. Okay, have a look at this position. It's from a game in 1989. Spraggett with white pieces versus San Segundo. And again we can see that black has played an early f5. We realise that black cannot recapture on f5 with a knight, we therefore take this playing e takes f5. Bishop takes f5, d4. Of course, black has no pawn control now over e4. Bishop h3, d5, knight f7, f3, taking control of the important e4 square. h5 was played, and knight c3, and of course the knight beckons on the e4 square. Now black decided that capturing on g2 was a little foolhardy, so he brings his bishop back and tries to control the e4 square with bishop f5. And here white played the rather excellent c5, and we can see that his pieces are excellently placed, and he now has a queenside attack. So that's a further example of how to deal with the capture on f5 if black plays an early f5. What about if instead of capturing with a piece, black takes with a pawn on f5? Well, let's have a wee look at that. Okay, have a look at this. We can see again the early f5. Now our preconditions for capturing on f5 are fulfilled because, of course, black cannot recapture with a knight. We therefore play the excellent e takes f5, and in this instance black does not recapture with a piece, but recaptures with the g-pawn. Now how should we deal with this? Well, clearly the move f4 is somewhat dangerous for us, and it's a bit of a pain having to calculate what might happen after f4. Therefore we simply blockade the f-pawn with the excellent move f4. Black played knight f6, knight takes f6, bishop takes f6, and white of course had a variety of follow-ups, but here he chose the move d4. E takes d4, knight takes d4, knight takes d4, bishop takes d4. Of course we're attacking the b7 pawn, so black was forced to play the move b6. And looking at the position, we see that we have more space in the centre. We've got a better pawn structure, and our king is of course safer than the black king, and we have fairly good prospects. So that's how to deal with the position if black takes on f5 after playing an early f5 with the g-pawn. Okay, there's one other thing in this particular system that I think that we should be aware of, and it's called the 8-6 tactic. Of course we can see these two pieces here, and the time is of course right for us to play knight d5, knowing that this knight is immune to capture. And if black ever plays this move queen to d7, then we have this rather excellent tactic, bishop to h6, seeking to deflect this bishop from its defence of the f6 square. Of course this bishop itself is immune to capture. If it ever captures, of course the queen hangs. And therefore black is essentially forced to castle and of course give up the exchange. So that's something to be aware of in this particular system, and it's termed the 8-6 tactic. And that essentially concludes our little overview of the strategies that are involved with the Botvinnik system, and we'll now go on to look at the theory of the Botvinnik system in some detail. And we'll cover all of black's most common replies. We'll look at 6 knight g to e7, 6 f5, 6 bishop e6, 6 knight d4, 6 h5, and of course 6 knight to f6. And we'll look at all these, and each will have its little video in turn. So thank you very much for your time, and I wish you well with your own chess.